In a film that I feature a lot on this channel, How to Blow Up a Pipeline, directed by Daniel Goldharber, it follows a group of young people who converge on a remote site in Texas with a mission. They plan to sabotage a pipeline. And in this video, we'll be talking about lone wolf violence, radical action. And I think this movie is an interesting exploration of the different motives that lead people to radical action. There's a college dropout and their hometown friend who has dealt with the ravages of these pipeline and oil companies leading to them and others around them being sick. There's the working class dude who is against the pipeline because of how it affects his family's land and eminent domain. There's an indigenous activist who is against the ship because they're indigenous. We live in a culture where radicalism is turned into aesthetics and lone wolfism is seen and perceived to be more symptom than strategy. What does it mean that we don't have clear images or conceptions on a mass level of what radical action look like? And what does it mean that we're in a culture where lone wolves become the scapegoats for the right? Also during a time when the repression of anti-fascism is inevitable. What happens when personal suffering and injustice compels people to do more than they thought they could have before? What happens when frustration with conventional activism means that something else must be done? And what happens when your state, your government, or your nation deems the radical action that you're doing terrorism?
Need any legislation? You wouldn't need any amendments to the Constitution. No, I'm not an American. I'm one of the 22 million black people who are the victims of Americanism. One of the 22 million black people who are the victims of democracy. Nothing but disguised hypocrisy. And I see America through the eyes of a victim.
Necropolitics. And this feels really central to me kind of digging into a lot of the optics and discourse around what happened to Charlie Kirk and the demands for empathy. And especially if you've seen my Why the US is Fascist video, it's one of the central kind of core pillars to my argument about the American project as a death-making machine and how a part of white supremacy and imperialism is the demand that some people live and some people die, and creating all of these institutions and systems and processes and beliefs and manufactured consent that leads into the fascism that is the US. And I think in this situation, we can see the necropolitics of it all. And to really succinctly try to define necropolitics in this moment, it's a concept, I think, notably kind of coined by Achille Mbembe that basically talks about the death-making processes that white supremacy, the state, imperialism demands. And in a lot of ways, it's about the social contract having an underlying agreement that some people are more deserving of death. Some people are closer to systems of death. Some people are relegated to experiencing these cycles of death, whether it be carcerality, whether it be surveillance, whether it be repression, whether it be militaristic invention, whether it be the draining of resources, whether it be criminalization, being pathologized. When we look at necropolitics as a vehicle for anti-Blackness and anti-indigeneity and xenophobia and a demand that white supremacy get to define the terms of life and death. When I really expand this whole concept about necropolitics, the whole Charlie Kirk situation, like what really gets me heated when I really start to think about it and talk about it is I think the demand for all of this mass empathy about him, the repainting of him as an organizer as opposed to a fascist, this pathologizing him as a father, as a dad, his kids were in front of him. Erica Gardner had to watch her father be killed again and again and again on video. And for months, she protested and tried to advocate for her father's life while the media, while the elite dragged him through the fucking mud. Look at how the media treated Michael Brown. This is a criminal deserving of death. Look at how the media depicted and treated and talked about Tamir Rice. I believe he was 12 or 13 years old, black kid with the toy gun in a park. Cops pull up within seconds, unalive him. And this is what I mean, and this is where I get pissed off. This is where like the whole Dean Weathers or liberals or other people crying, and we are living in a system built on fucking violence. Our negotiation with both the Republican Party and the Democratic Party and all of the compromises that are required for the reforms that came out of Black Lives Matter that led to body cameras, where there's simply more evidence. There is a social contract that is the American project that says if you are a citizen, you have to pay taxes, and your government can basically do whatever the fuck it wants. And it believes, it markets to you that certain kinds of people are more criminal, certain kinds of people are more uncivilized, certain kinds of people need to be policed or surveyed more. And those people, they might just end up in the fucking crossfire of a cop needing to get home. And so when we talk about Charlie Kirk, when we talk about all this bullshit and people are demanding that you have empathy for him, he literally built and propagated a career and profited off of making fun of other people's deaths, making light of the gun violence that leads to not only kids being shot up in schools, but Black people or other people, poor people, people in the hood, doing violence against each other because of the accessibility of the guns, etc. And for someone to make light of other people's misery, to say that empathy is a word made up by the enemy, by the liberal class, to say that we should be able to say whatever we want. There are consequences to white supremacy. There are consequences to building an entire system where you demand that everyone agree to allow the government to kill them, to kill their community, to kill their kids, to kill their future, to spread vitriol and ignorance that enables other people to go up to someone and commit a hate crime, to go up to someone and just denigrate someone's humanity. White supremacy is literally defended by violence, and it is defined by its capacity to be so imaginative in how it can create suffering and death. And those people want to tell us to be empathetic when they leave this world and they leave it a lot more peaceful. It's mind-boggling to me. It's mind-boggling to have the oppressor define what is violence, define what is law enforcement, define what is crime, define what is necessary strategic state counterinsurgency. All of these things are forms of violence, but the connective tissue I'm really wanting all of you to understand is that when the state commits violence in the name of its own demand for a certain kind of status quo, that is necropolitics. And the state does not expect to be punished. Those aligned with the state do not expect to be punished. White supremacists are not supposed to die in the way that Charlie Kirk did in the minds of other white supremacists. And when they ask you to cry for him, they're asking you to cry for a white supremacist. Really. Yeah. It's just actually fucking mind-boggling when I think of it. When I think about the fact that in my home city, Cleveland, there are Black people that after Tamir Rice was killed was just like, oh, well, we knew him. I mean, we wasn't surprised. But for Charlie Kirk, people are like, oh, it was so disgusting and disturbing. On my last video, I want to highlight this comment. In the end, Charlie Kirk really was left-leaning.
Now gets their own summertime celebration. Oh, wow, look how far Blacks have come. It has now become a racial complaining day. Remember what BLM stands for: burn, loot, and murder.
To dismantle left-wing terrorism, to dismantle Antifa, to dismantle the organizations that have been carrying out these acts of political violence and terrorism. What we have seen, if you look at whether it be going back to the riots that started with Black Lives Matter and all the way through to the Antifa riots, the attacks on ICE officers, the doxing campaigns, and now the political assassinations, these are not lone, isolated events. This is part of an organized campaign of radical left terrorism. It is...
MLK was called the terrorist. He was on the FBI watch list.
Why, he was like nice.
No. He was freaking ruthless.
I'm sorry. You're trying to equate civil rights movement to what we're doing here?
I mean,
Look,
it's kind of similar.
anytime anyone has challenged authority, they call it terrorism. And then when the terrorism works, they lie about the legacy and they say that it was all passive, nonviolent, kumbaya shit when it's not.
If the American empire calls us terrorists, then we're doing something right.
Fuck yeah, what he said, exactly. People talk shit about me my whole entire life.
Fascism is
a certain demographic's reaction to economic crisis. It purports a mythic leader. It demands loyalists. It tries to crush dissent. And it uses populism to allow the elite to sell false solutions to the masses that allow the elite to decide an internal and external enemy. And when you look at fascism through this lens, through this goal, I like to also expand my definition of fascism to kind of like how different thinkers talk about fascization. So not just being in an explicitly fascist system, but looking at the modes of behavior and systems and tools that lead towards a fascist society. What is the fascization that we're experiencing? I think about social crisis. And I think about how these lone wolves that are going after the economic elite, the right-wing elite, etc., these lone wolves are responding to the rising fascism, which has been allowed and pushed for by the manufactured consent of Trump's base, whether it be white nationalists, Christian nationalists, people that are into eugenics, the people that are a part of the tech elite, whatever it may be. I think these people are seeing both the economic and the social crisis of fascism and Americanism just as it stands. And to respond to the social crisis of civil liberties being taken away, to respond to the social crisis of trans folks being attacked and locked out of institutions and literal violence being encouraged against these populations, I don't think the elite can imagine a world where they experience consequences. I don't think the elite can imagine a world where the masses might actually disagree what they think and believe and say and lie about. And I think this is the conundrum of Trumpism and what is happening. We can look at fascism as what is being pushed for and purported for by the elite. And then what populist messages are people becoming susceptible to that's making fascism palatable to everyday people, lower class, middle class, upper class, whatever, just not the elite. And this begins to create an interesting scenario. We're experiencing the loneliness epidemic. We're experiencing the loss of third places. Smaller businesses are closing down. The government is currently under a shutdown. I mean, food stamps are going to go away come November, theoretically, if the government shutdown continues. There's a ceasefire, but it's not actually a ceasefire. Most of the political messaging we're given by the state, under fascism especially, is going to be a lie. And this lie produces a psychosis that people will do anything to get out of. And I do not think this is something that the fascist elite are factoring in. But I do think it's something that they are going to be willing to respond to. And this is where the question lies of how does the left connect across all of these different areas? How does the revolutionary left connect to the religious left, to the academic left, to the unions, to the disaffected voters, to the non-voters, to disabled folks, to LGBTQIA folks? The left is so expansive and huge. And I feel like these instances of lone wolf violence against the right-wing elite, it's a signifier that there are certain social, cultural, and political threads, narratives, that we should be paying attention to. And my question for you is, what are the narratives at play that would lead someone like the alleged shooter Luigi Mangione, like the alleged shooter Tyler Robinson, to do what they did? And how can those counter-narratives be instead turned towards community action, militant action, collective action? What does history tell us? Think about that.
Some statements I made concerning the President of the United States, which were distorted. They were distorted. And yes. And what did you say, Malcolm? Well, I said the same thing that everybody says, that his assassination was the result of the climate of hate. But only I said the chickens came home to roost, and which means the same thing. Climate of hate means that this is the result of something. And when I said chickens coming home to roost, I said the same thing. But you did not say that you were glad the president was killed. No, that's what the press said. What would I look like saying that I'm glad the president was killed? Malcolm, this was your first public statement in that 90-day period, is it not? First time I opened up my mouth in 90 days. That's why I'm talking so fast and so hearty. You feel, however, that we're making progress worldwide? No. I will never say that progress is being made. Knife in my back 9 inches and pull it out 6 inches. There's no progress. You pull it all the way out, that's not progress. The progress is healing the wound that's blow made. And they haven't even begun to pull a knife out, much less try and heal the wound. They won't even admit
the real reasons. This whole Charlie Kirk situation makes me so angry. It's almost tied to a personal memory that when I really mine it, it is literally sort of the definition of necropolitics. But when I was younger, like meaning like an infant, I was really sick and I was in the NICU for months and months. And my dad was in and out of the picture, doing all kinds of stuff, not being reliable to my mom. He passed when I was 8 months old, 9 months old. There's a story that sticks out to me. My mother said that she was grieving, so confused, scared for me, and she was in the hospital with her sister. And her sister said, on a cosmic level, some people have to die so that others can live. Because around that time, I was also getting better. All of the medical complications I had kind of lessened. I became more stable. And the reason I get so angry about the news and Charlie Kirk and people crying over him and demanding empathy, I've never known someone my whole life. There's the material violence that they did in their life. And there's also the fact that just like other men in my family, if my father had lived, he could have changed. He could have found new ways to make money, healed through some of his traumas, become a more reliable, conscious person. He could have become even more of who he was or he could have been. I do think people make choices and there are consequences. And I'm not trying to pathologize all of this. I've grown up my whole life knowing that my father is the kind of man that dies in this world. A Black man, a Jamaican man, someone who dealt drugs, someone who was criminal. And despite that, because I never knew him, I longed for an understanding of his humanity. I longed to know all these details. What was his favorite food? What was his favorite color? And yet, when I was growing up, people like my dad were the cautionary tales. And I always felt very confused about the duality of how people remembered him, the systemic nature of how easy it was for him to be erased. Then having a stepfather who was so kind and caring and present also go to prison. It's kind of like the James Baldwin quote. He says, like, you watch all these Western movies and you root for the cowboy, and then one day you look up and you realize that the Indian is you. The fact that some people grow up in the world and they understand that there are systems that are out to kill them. There are people that are out to kill them. There are people that want to erase their humanity, that don't want them to be on this planet, that wouldn't give a fuck if they were shot in the face in front of a crowd of people. And those people have to fight to define and redefine their humanity. Because of these things growing up, I always had a belief that I would pass like my dad did, that certain things were inevitable, certain things were cosmic. And when we talk about white supremacy, and I was listening to a podcast from Seeds of Revolution yesterday, and they talked about how one of the catalysts for contemporary fascism is relative disparity, which is an interesting term. It's basically saying, like, if you're white, upper class, middle class, etc., but you're around poverty or around criminality, you begin to fear that whatever you have might be taken away by these criminal elements around you. I hear the layers of necropolitics. I see how I was treated growing up in Cleveland, going into the mall or going into my school and always being policed. I see how people watched me in stores. I see how Katrina is such a necropolitical event. And it really pisses me off when we live under white supremacy, we live under imperialism, yet people want you to have empathy for white supremacists. Like, I just really can't compute it in my brain. And then this goes even further, because another one of my points for this video is the fact that what does self-defense look like against imperialism, against white supremacy? It often looks like, in the present moment, when you defend yourself or your community, they call you a terrorist. They call you crazy, they call you mentally ill. And granted, we can't characterize every act of lone wolf violence or nihilistic violence or any of these political assassinations under all these categories of being explicitly political. But why don't we say that cops who kill people are deranged or crazed or dangerous to society? Why don't we say that politicians that don't pay taxes and extract from the land and do shit like Epstein did, that they aren't dangerous to society. Why don't we apply the necropolitical lens of some people have to live, some people have to die so that others can live? If we look at the elite class and we look at if they learned how to be conscious members of society, or if they just all disappeared, how much better would the world be? How much better would the world be? Like, literally think of that question. Hitler, bam. How much better did the world become after that? Granted, we have to do the work to absolve these systems of fascism, of imperialism, of subjugation, and there is work to be done. But to ask me or other people to define what empathy should be for us when we're offered next to no empathy in return against these systems of violence, it literally, to me, is like the definition of psychosis. Like, it's the same pattern, and you're asking me to believe in something that literally goes against my reality. And that is what is wild to me. It's absolutely wild. And the more we experience these spectacles of violence where there are these shared discourses that are trying to be manufactured around it, we have to define for ourselves, as I mentioned before, what violence and what empathy is. What is state violence? What is political violence? What is horizontal violence? What is intrapersonal violence? What is the violence that we inflict upon ourselves through believing or leaning into the naivete that these systems can protect us? And what do we do when fascism is increasingly at our door? When someone comes into your town and they're a bunch of Nazis or a fascist, like, what's wild to me is that the fact that this happened to Charlie Kirk now, this is after roughly 10 years of the right wing going onto college campuses and spreading vitriol and being protested and being pushed back against and sometimes being welcomed. The opposition has been building. And now that fascism is way more institutionalized and way more ever present and is innovating itself, the opposition is choosing different strategies. I think it's ridiculous to view this as just some horrific thing that happened to this organizer and dad, when it's, no, if we put it in context, America is a white supremacist project that has innovated slavery, carcerality, war, surveillance, counterinsurgency, and Charlie Kirk was a literal elite and enabler of that process. When we think about all the resources that are extracted from communities, when we think about the lack of pay, the lack of healthcare in this country, when we think about the lack of things that people need to live a quality life, and then the political conditions that people are subjected to, the lack of humanity that people are being demanded and exhibiting in order to participate in this American project, empathy is a denial of Americanism. Empathy is a denial of white supremacy. Empathy is a denial of imperialism. And so to demand empathy for a bigot is to demand empathy for the empire. And it's just not going to work. And I think some people's whiteness is showing, some people's attachment to liberalism. Like, I think the people that are crying over Charlie Kirk are crying because him dying is a deviation from a system that they are very familiar with. Even if they have critiques of that system, even if they want reforms of the system. And some people want the system to fucking burn down. How does a liberal civility and a insurrectionary revolution sit at the same table and find common ground? Or is that possible? That's my question. Is it even possible? When it's like under imperialism, self-defense against a cop, self-defense against an imperialist, against a white supremacist becomes a crime. Are you ready to be a criminal to defend your life and the lives of those around you? This is one of the core questions of the Black liberation movement. It's one of the core questions of revolutionary suicide, which it was coined by Huey P. Newton, turning away from a reactionary suicide, becoming trapped by the systems and vices and escapisms of Babylon, and actually going to the root of it, and how that under imperialism makes you a criminal. And oh wow, there's bison over there, and I'm like, oh my God, they're rolling around. Y'all gotta let me know if there's a bison rolling up behind me, because I'm not paying the most attention.
MLK was called a terrorist. He was on the FBI watch list.
Wait, he was like nice.
No. He was freaking ruthless.
I'm sorry. You're trying to equate civil rights movement to what we're doing here?
I mean,
look,
it's kind of similar.
Anytime anyone has challenged authority, they call it terrorism. And then when the terrorism works, They lie about the legacy and they say that it was all passive, nonviolent, kumbaya shit when it's
If
not.
the American empire calls us terrorists, then we're doing something right.
Fuck yeah.
And also, how can someone so hot, rich, smart, and normal do something like this? Basically, he got fed the fuck up, and he did what he did. After his surgery, frustrated with the healthcare system. The United States healthcare system is so fucked up because in order to have a surgery done or something that you know that you need to get done, they make you go through like 6 months of physical therapy, and then when you're done with that, then we can do the surgery. It's like, so I'm gonna suffer for 6 months. Before the crime, he started isolating himself and disconnecting from everyone, and he started posting more about anti-corporation ideology on different Reddit threads and Goodreads review, where he was idolizing Ted Kazunuki's ideology, talking about anti-corporations and how much he hated them and how frustrated he was with them. He was a very social, involved, happy.
I think something else that's couched in this situation that I think is interesting is the distinction between nihilistic kind of violent action and the lone wolfness of some of these situations, like how Luigi Mangione wasn't politically tied to an organization, as far as I believe, or an affinity group. The alleged shooter of the United Health CEO, alleged shooter, engraved these bullets with messages. Tyler Robinson, the alleged shooter of Charlie Kirk, also engraved these bullets. Also, a lone guy found the tools and the resources to take these actions. Allegedly, some people believe that these acts are a short-term bliss and we need to have a long-term strategy. These lone wolves turning against their own side, or the side that they've been born into, the side of history that they've been born into, there's extreme legibility to what they are pushing back against. People push back against the bigots and the fascists that they've grown up with. It's a byproduct of a dying civilization that is telling you what humanity is. And that humanity is actually demanding that you strip other people of their humanity. And you wake up day after day after day behind enemy lines. How do you escape? How do you become the enemy from within?
Nonviolence would achieve the gains for black people in the United States. His major assumption was that if you are nonviolent, if you suffer, your opponent will see your suffering and will be moved to change his heart. That's very good. He only made one fallacious assumption. In order for nonviolence to work, your opponent must have a conscience. The United States has none. Has none.
He's supposed to sit passively and have no feelings, be nonviolent, and love his enemy. No matter what kind of attack, be it verbal or otherwise, he's supposed to take it. But if he stands up and in any way tries to defend himself, then he's an...
So this is the last section of this video. I want to talk about a few different things. First, I'm going to kind of dig into some of the details around how the alleged shooter Tyler Robinson was caught, because there's some things to unpack. And if you see any animals behind me, let me know. And then I want to read a little bit from Tip of the Spear, because I think it further contextualizes what I've been talking about in this video. And Tip of the Spear is by Orisanmi Burton. And this is a really amazing book I've been reading on that talks about various rebellions around the time of Attica, the conditions in prisons, how these civil rights leading to the Black Panther Party and the BLA movement led to so many movements within prisons, and how these explosions of rebellions are a signifier of what people hungered for during that time, which was a very real kind of militant radicalism. But I'm going to go off of the dome because I don't have all of my internet and other things with me. On this trip, I've been reading more about the details behind how the alleged shooter of Charlie Kirk was discovered. And if I can, I'm going to put some things up on screen. But from reading like articles over the last few days, Tyler Robinson lived with his roommate, who is trans, and that roommate received numerous text messages related to details about the rifle that was allegedly used for this crime. After this crime happened, Tyler Robinson is in a Discord group chat with a bunch of his friends and community. And shortly after the shooting, and shortly after the image of the alleged shooter came out, people in that group chat sent it to the group chat and tagged Tyler and said, I think they basically loosely questioned as a joke. And Tyler responded and said that it was his doppelganger, and then made a joke about how he should get rid of his copycat rifle. and then continued to joke in the chat, continued to joke in the chat, continued to joke in the chat. Ha ha, he he. The people in this chat also joked about turning Tyler in for the $100,000 like reward. There's just so many things about how this alleged shooter acted after the alleged event where I'm thinking, if anyone is planning anything militant, direct action, if someone does something militant, we're not even talking about Charlie Kirk and this alleged shooter, and this is a relatively public forum. It's not going to be deleted. I'm pretty sure if the police was able to get access to those Discord chats, it wasn't deleted. And it's also said that within 24 hours, I believe it was the FBI was able to interview 1,000 people. So with the state's capacity to survey, to document, to go after people, why would anyone share details about a militant direct action that they just did on a public forum? Because to me, anything online is a public forum. And then 2, this alleged shooter confessed to their father, and their father took them in. And it's these details about the case that if this person did do this, it gives me a lot of thoughts and questions around nihilistic political violence, around lone wolves. I mean, I think I've talked about it before, but from Luigi to Tyler, these alleged shooters, engraved bullets, certain levels of planning. I mean, I think if you look at what Luigi allegedly did, masking up for long periods of time in order to not be identified, other than, I believe it was one photo that they took while staying at a hostel that allowed certain, like, that kind of, like, allowed certain connections to be made with Tyler Robinson, this alleged shooter. I wonder how much time, precision, and emotional preparation went into this act. Because we don't want to make light of any of these things, these political actions, these alleged political actions. It raises all of these questions, and I think we're entering a political period where, of course, fascism is on the rise. And it's interesting because if we look at these white, far leftist vigilantes, something is breaking in the fabric of society as we know it. And a lot of it concerns violence, our perspectives on violence, what we're asked to consider violence, what we're asked to consider law and order. And I think it really is a time to reorient ourselves, to find our own definitions. And so I want to read a bit of Tip of the Spear. So this is the beginning of the book, and it essentially is recounting how in August 18th, 1973, Queen Mother Audley Moore, a stalwart communist and Pan-Africanist revolutionary, traveled to Green Haven prison and delivered a remarkable keynote. And this is said to be roughly 2 years after the Attica Rebellion. This speaker, Moore, is talking about recaptivity and how Black people are a captivated nation and those who are in prison are doubly captivated, and how we need to understand who the real criminal is. And in this text, it reads, she reminded her audience, comprised of people variously convicted of robbery, assault, rape, murder, and drug-related crimes, that none of them had ever stolen entire countries, cultures, or peoples, or sold human beings into slavery for profit. Although some of them had tried to imitate the white man, she continued, they had never really stolen, and neither had they ever really murdered. Have you taken mothers and strung them up by their heels, she asked, and took your knives and slit their bellies open so that their unborn babies can fall to the ground, and then took your heel and crushed those babies into the ground? Have you ever dropped bombs on people and killed whole countries of people? Have you done that, brothers? Given that the American empire is constituted through apocalyptic violence and incalculable theft, Moore argues that crimes committed by the human spoils of war were necessarily derivative of the organized crimes of the state. Moore explained that as a student of Marcus Garvey and a veteran of the Black liberation movement since 1950s, she had accumulated very valuable insight into the science of white supremacy. With the horror of the Attica massacre fresh in the audience's mind, she told the appalling story of her grandfather's lynching, explaining that prisons function in tandem with other tactics of white patriarchal domination. This is so beautiful and telling because if you read this and intake this perspective and understand it and deepen it with your own reading, it helps you equate and understand that the American project is a project of vehement, disgusting, innovative violence. And anyone that defends themselves against it is usually considered taboo, stigmatized, mentally ill, whatever you want to call it. I loved this text is able to situate these things, and I want to read another part of it that specifically goes into Kawasi Balagoon talking about violence. And for those that don't know, Kawasi Balagoon is there a section in here that talks about him? Kawasi Balagoon, I might have talked about him on this channel or on my podcast, The Dugout, but Kawasi Balagoon is a really famous BLA member. He was Black Liberation Army member. He was a part of the Panther 21, so attached to the Black Panther Party, was considered a gender rebel by many that knew him, also had a trans partner, and I can't remember exactly what his nickname was, but he was known for breaking out of jail. So sick, honestly, fucking sick dude. And in this text, he talks specifically about being a part of a prison rebellion that I believe happened at Brooklyn Queens Prison. And this is a section of the book titled Concerning Violence. Violence lay at the core of this conflict, and both sides had important considerations concerning its use. When captives and already criminalized and dishonored population attack jail infrastructure, seize hostages, and threaten them with execution, they defied the moral and legal norms that granted the state a monopoly on legitimate violence. Their revolutionary action gave rise to an alternate political, ethical, and moral universe. I literally thought that thing next to me was a mirror. Okay. Moral universe, where established terms like murder and killing failed to convey the meaning of taking lives that many believed deserved to be taken. As one of the rebels explained to a radio journalist, "What do you call killing a man who really deserves to die?" ? Because they deserve to die. They should be killed, ... They are more guilty than we are, if anybody is. They have done 10 times worse than we have ever done, than we could ever do. They are the real criminals for allowing the system to perpetuate. Can you define the violence that this system, whether capitalism, whether the American project, whether it be imperialism, has done to us, to you, to me, to generations of people that we know, to poor people, to undocumented people, to trans people, to kids, to Black people, to brown people, to poor folks, poor white folks? We have to be educated enough and disciplined enough to either be in community and to understand this violence on an interpersonal level, or as well to study it, to know it, and then, based on our knowing of it, to not allow the enemy to determine what our fight is. And that's really where I want to end this video. I think we really have to understand that political violence is always going to be considered terrorism when it's done by citizens, but when the government does the same thing, it's just diplomacy, it's law and order, it's protecting the sanctity of our nation, scrubbing away DEI, closing down museums, removing entire exhibits about Indigenous or Black history. Are these not forms of violence that encourage supremacist, eugenicist, or white people to go out and do the things that we've seen mass shooters in other situations do, to do the things that we know Donald Trump has done and been accused of and has been charged with, and there has been built up evidence of the crimes that he has committed? And I don't even want to know what kind of cultist circles that Donald Trump and Charlie Kirk are involved in. And I think the public, citizens, people subjected to the whims of state violence, which can determine and redefine itself and always see it as legitimate. I think people have to define what violence is and understand that we are all sentient beings capable of violence. Self-defense, community self-defense, anti-fascism, political violence, all of these are things that we have to negotiate in the revolutionary process. These are things that people like Assata Shakur, Kawasi Balagoon, Mumia Abu-Jamal, Jamal Joseph, Ashanti Alston, Afeni Shakur, Assata Shakur, when we allow the state to define violence for us, it means that the state can kill us whenever it wishes to, and we will ultimately never defend ourselves. And that is not a life that any of us, I think, should be living. Anti-fascism and self-defense as both individual and collective. And I think we need to study what fascism looks like today, how it's changing. We have to understand what pulls people towards fascism and try to organize against that. There needs to be militant action that confronts the empire, because whether it's a Republican or a Democrat or whatever the fuck in between in office, people will die. The American project will say that certain people are deserving of death and other people should never, ever, ever have to deal with violence or anything that they enable to happen against other communities. It shouldn't happen to them. The white man, the white man that is the patriarchal figure, that is our father. It should never happen to him. The white man, the white supremacist, who has enabled slavery, who has enabled breeding farms, who has enabled all sorts of torture and capture, does not deserve nearly in the way that they have killed so many others. And that is the strange thing, to be asked to have empathy for someone that would murder a group of people if they could, or pass policies that lead to their murder or the subjugation of their community. And what I think anti-fascism can look like for many people in this moment is, do you know how to defend yourself if a fascist or a Nazi or whoever comes into your community? Do you talk to those around you? Do you talk to more vulnerable people in your communities? Do you have networks of communication and connection? Are you going to other cultural gatherings and events? Are you joining organizations of people from different backgrounds that you want to organize with? Are you in community with people, or are your politics solely through their phone, through individual conversations with friends? I think we have to expand our political world and expand what anti-fascism looks like. We should be studying when fascists are coming into our communities. We should be studying the fascist organizations and rhetoric that is being spread by our politicians. And we should be building the infrastructure to not only to have the resources that the state will be extracting from us, but also to go even deeper into what we think anti-fascism is. And I think that can look like a lot of things. It can look like Black Bloc. It can look like going where they go. It can look like it's on site whenever they're in public. It can look like so many things. And that the nihilistic political violence that we're seeing orchestrated, especially by people that have far leftist ideologies, it's a signifier of a changing tide, of different questions being asked, of people wanting catharsis in a political system that doesn't provide nearly enough catharsis. And beyond these nihilistic and very targeted and real militant forms of action by specific individuals, we need to build the infrastructure to defend each other. I hope this video helps you gain some perspective. I hope it gives you some insight into different frameworks and concepts that can help you process this moment. And I think one of my next intentions in the Direct Action 101 series is to maybe do one specifically about community self-defense. So let me know in the comments if you want to see that. And I'm going to go and touch grass. This is the outro. This is a reminder that I host a podcast called The Dugout, a Black Anarchist podcast. You should check it out. I also am a contributor to Means TV, an amazing leftist cooperative streaming service that has beautiful documentaries. And in any of my video descriptions, if you go into the comments and you click on the link, you will get a discount with my code. And Means TV is an amazing resource. In a lot of my videos, I use a lot of their content as B-roll. They have amazing documentaries and videos about Palestine, amazing reoccurring segments and shows like Seizing the Memes. Also, I have a book. If you watch this channel, you don't know that I have a book. I have a book called When They Tell You to Be Good. It's a political memoir. It describes my political coming of age. There are things in there that I talk about on this channel and things that I don't. It's hyper personal. It's a deep dive into my family, my life, my history as a Jamaican American, as a product of different forms of love and patriarchal violence, and me mining that through politics, travel, emotional encounters and confrontations. I talk about Standing Rock. I talk about going to France in my first riot. So if you want to read a text that grounds you in how someone else is politicized, please consider checking that out. But for now, I'm going to go and eat some food because I'm hungry. I hiked today.